The rattling of the prison wagon chains jolted Tabitha Fletcher awake on a dusty New Mexico trail as dawn broke over the mountains. She wasn't a criminal, but her fate had been sealed by her dead husband's signature on a gambling marker, her life now worth exactly the $4,000 he'd owed to the most ruthless man in Santa Fe. "Almost there, Mrs. Fletcher," sneered Amos Greeley, the debt collector who'd shown up at her small homestead 3 days after they'd buried her husband Elijah. He'd waved the papers in her face while his men ransacked her home for valuables. "Mr. Thornton's establishment needs a new entertainment manager. Your husband thought you'd be perfect for the position." Tabitha's throat tightened as she remembered how Elijah's drinking had worsened after their second failed harvest. She'd never imagined he'd wager her like property. At 23, she was now bound for Thornton's notorious gambling hall and brothel, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the wedding band she'd hidden in her boot. The Santa Fe morning was already blistering as the wagon rolled down the main street. Dust swirled around the wooden buildings, and Tabitha watched through tear-blurred eyes as respectable women in fine dresses averted their gazes. They knew where this wagon was headed. "Stop the wagon!" The command cut through the morning air like a gunshot. Tabitha looked up to see a tall figure on horseback blocking their path. The sun silhouetted him, casting his face in shadow beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "This ain't your business, Blackburn," Greeley spat, his hand hovering near his pistol. "This is Thornton's property now, fair and square." The rider approached slowly, and Tabitha could finally see him clearly. He was perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark blonde hair curled slightly where it met his collar, and though his clothes were dusty from the trail, they were of good quality. "I said stop." The man's voice was quiet but carried an unmistakable authority. "This woman is not property. She is according to this." Greeley thrust a paper at the stranger. "Her husband signed her over. Debt's legal." The man they called Blackburn dismounted smoothly, taking the paper. His eyes flicked from the document to Tabitha, and something in his expression changed. "How much?" $4,000. Greeley laughed cruelly. "Which you don't have, Blackburn, so move along." Without a word, the stranger reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch. $4,000, count it." Tabitha gasped. Nobody carried that kind of money, especially not a lone cowboy. Greeley's eyes widened as he poured gold coins into his palm. "This doesn't change Thornton's claim. He paid in advance. Then I'll pay again." The man reached back into his saddlebag and produced another pouch. $4,000 more. That should cover any inconvenience." Tabitha could barely breathe as Greeley counted the second payment, his greedy fingers trembling. Who was this man? Why would he pay such a fortune for a stranger? "Fine." Greeley tucked both pouches into his vest. "She's yours, Blackburn. Do what you want with her." The stranger stepped forward and unlocked Tabitha's chains with a key he'd taken from Greeley. As the manacles fell away, he spoke softly so only she could hear. "You're not mine. You're free." Tabitha blinked up at him, unable to comprehend his words. "What?" "My name is Fletcher Blackburn," he said, offering his hand to help her down from the wagon. "And you, madam, don't belong to anyone." Tabitha hesitated, suspicion warring with desperate hope. In her experience, men didn't part with money unless they expected something in return. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Fletcher Blackburn's eyes softened. "Because no person should be sold like cattle. It's not right." As she tentatively took his hand and stepped down from the wagon, Tabitha realized this was either the end of one nightmare or the beginning of another. But the gentle way Fletcher Blackburn steadied her, then immediately stepped back to give her space, made her wonder if perhaps, against all odds, She'd found something precious and rare in this harsh territory, a good man. What she couldn't know then was that Fletcher Blackburn had demons of his own, that his act of kindness would put them both in Thornton's crosshairs, and that the dusty streets of Santa Fe would soon run with blood because of what happened on this sweltering morning in 1876. The crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation parted as Fletcher led Tabitha away from the wagon. She was painfully aware of the whispers following them, the judgmental stares of the townsfolk who had already condemned her based on her husband's actions. "You'll need somewhere to stay," Fletcher said as they walked. He maintained a respectful distance, hands tucked into his belt. "There's a boarding house run by Mrs. Abernathy at the edge of town. She's strict but fair." Tabitha stopped abruptly. "Mr. Blackburn, I appreciate what you've done, but I have nothing. No money, no belongings. I can't pay for lodging." Fletcher frowned, seemingly confused by her concern. "I didn't save you from Thornton to leave you destitute in the street." He reached into his pocket and withdrew several bills. "This should cover a few weeks at the boarding house and some necessities." "I can't accept that." Tabitha's pride flared despite her desperate situation. "I won't trade one owner for another." A look of surprise, then respect, crossed Fletcher's face. "That's not my intention, Mrs. Fletcher. This is not a loan or an advance. It's yours freely given with no expectations." Tabitha studied him, searching for deceit in his eyes but finding none. "Why? You've already spent a fortune. Why help me further?" Fletcher's gaze drifted to the distant mountains. "Let's just say I understand what it means to be trapped by another's actions. Please take it. Get back on your feet. What you do after that is entirely your choice." After a moment's hesitation, Tabitha accepted the money. "Thank you, Mr. Blackburn. I'll repay you someday." "That's not necessary." His smile was brief but genuine. "Now let me escort you to Mrs. Abernathy's. Santa Fe can be dangerous for a woman alone." As they walked through town, Tabitha became increasingly aware of her appearance. Her dress was dirty from the journey, her hair tangled and unwashed. She must look like exactly what Greeley had intended to sell her as. The thought made her cheeks burn with humiliation. "Don't mind them," Fletcher said quietly, noticing her discomfort as another well-dressed couple hurried past, the woman clutching her husband's arm more tightly. "People are quick to judge what they don't understand." "And what do you understand, Mr. Blackburn?" Tabitha asked, suddenly curious about this mysterious benefactor. "I understand that good people can end up in bad situations through no fault of their own," he replied. "And sometimes, all it takes to change a person's fate is one decision." They reached a neat two-story house with white trim and a small garden. A sign hanging from the porch read, "Abernathy Boarding House, Respectable Lodgings." The door opened before they reached it, revealing a stern-faced woman with gray-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. She assessed them critically through wire-rimmed spectacles. "Mr. Blackburn," she acknowledged with a nod. "It's been some time." "Mrs. Abernathy," Fletcher removed his hat. "I have a lady in need of lodging. Mrs. Fletcher is recently widowed and requires a quiet place to stay while she gets back on her feet." The older woman's sharp eyes took in Tabitha's disheveled appearance, and Tabitha braced herself for rejection. "But Mrs. Abernathy's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Recently widowed, you say?" She addressed Tabitha directly. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Fletcher. I have a room available if you'd like to see it." "That's very kind, thank you," Tabitha managed, relieved but confused by the easy acceptance. Mrs. Abernathy turned to Fletcher. "I assume you're vouching for her character, Mr. Blackburn?" "Absolutely," he replied without hesitation. "Well then, come in." She stepped aside, allowing them entrance. Though I'll remind you of my rule about gentlemen callers, Mr. Blackburn. Visits in the parlor only and not after 7 in the evening. Fletcher's ears reddened slightly. I understand, madam. I'm merely ensuring Mrs. Fletcher's safe arrival. Tabitha followed Mrs. Abernathy inside, the cool interior a welcome relief from the heat. The house was modest but immaculately kept, with simple furnishings and the scent of beeswax polish in the air. The room is small but clean, Mrs. Abernathy explained as she led them upstairs. Meals are served at 7, noon, and 6. Laundry day is Tuesday, bath day Saturday, though for an extra fee, you can arrange additional bathing privileges. The room was indeed small, with a narrow bed, washstand, and small dresser. But the window overlooked the garden and clean curtains fluttered in the breeze. After the wagon and the prospect of Thornton's establishment, it seemed like a palace to Tabitha. It's perfect, she said honestly. Thank you. Mrs. Abernathy nodded. I'll give you a moment to get settled. Mr. Blackburn, perhaps you join me downstairs for coffee while Mrs. Fletcher freshens up. After they left, Tabitha sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the morning's events. She pulled her wedding band from her boot and stared at it, memories of Elijah flooding back, not the bitter, desperate man of their final months together, but the charming, ambitious young farmer who'd courted her with wildflowers and promises of a beautiful future. How had it come to this? Tabitha closed her eyes, allowing herself one moment of grief before squaring her shoulders. She had been given a second chance, and she wouldn't waste it wallowing in the past. She used the water in the pitcher to wash her face and hands, then did her best to smooth her hair and dress. When she felt somewhat presentable, she made her way downstairs to find Fletcher and Mrs. Abernathy in quiet conversation that ceased abruptly upon her entrance. Mrs. Fletcher, Fletcher stood immediately. I should be going. I've taken enough of your time. You're leaving? Tabitha asked, surprised by the twinge of disappointment she felt. I have some business to attend to, he explained. But Santa Fe isn't so large that we won't cross paths again. Mr. Blackburn has settled your account for the month, Mrs. Abernathy informed her. And I've directed him to Harmon's General Store, where you have credit for whatever necessities you require. That's too much, Tabitha protested, turning to Fletcher. It's done, he said simply. Consider it a fresh start. He placed his hat on his head and moved toward the door. Good day, Mrs. Fletcher, Mrs. Abernathy. Mr. Blackburn, Tabitha called before he could leave. I don't know how to thank you. Fletcher paused, his hand on the doorknob. Live your life, Mrs. Fletcher, that's thanks enough. After he departed, Mrs. Abernathy studied Tabitha with renewed interest. That man doesn't extend himself for just anyone. You must be something special. I'm nobody, Tabitha admitted. Just a farmer's widow with nothing to my name. Mrs. Abernathy's eyes twinkled. Well, Fletcher Blackburn seems to disagree. And in my experience, he's an excellent judge of character. She bustled toward the kitchen. Now, let's get you something to eat. You look half-starved, and I won't have people saying Agatha Abernathy doesn't feed her boarders properly. As Tabitha followed, she realized she knew nothing about the man who had saved her, not where he lived, what he did, or why he happened to be in the right place at the right time. But one thing was certain. Fletcher Blackburn had given her freedom when all hope seemed lost. And somehow she would find a way to repay that debt, whether he wanted repayment or not. The next morning, Tabitha awoke to sunlight streaming through her window. For a moment, she was disoriented, expecting to see the familiar rafters of her homestead. Reality crashed back quickly. Elijah was dead, their farm was lost, and she was starting over in a boarding house paid for by a stranger's charity. She dressed in her only outfit, now freshly laundered thanks to Mrs. Abernathy's kindness the previous evening, and made her way downstairs. The other boarder's two elderly sisters and a young school teacher nodded politely but kept their distance. News traveled fast in Santa Fe, and Tabitha suspected they knew exactly how she'd arrived in town. "I've made a list of things you'll need, Mrs. Abernathy announced, handing Tabitha a piece of paper over breakfast. "Harmon's store is expecting you. His wife Mildred will help you find everything." Tabitha swallowed her pride and accepted the list. "Thank you. I'll go this morning. And I've asked around about work, Mrs. Abernathy continued, pouring coffee. "The hotel needs a laundress, and Doc Wilson mentioned needing help organizing his office. Nothing glamorous, but honest work." Touched by the woman's efforts, Tabitha smiled genuinely for the first time since arriving. "I appreciate that more than I can say." After breakfast, Tabitha ventured into town. Santa Fe was bustling with morning activity, merchants opening shops, ranch hands collecting supplies, ladies shopping for household necessities. She kept her head high despite the curious glances and whispers that followed her progress down the main street. Harmon's general store was larger than she expected, with shelves stacked to the ceiling with goods ranging from basic necessities to luxury items. A plump, friendly woman approached as Tabitha entered. "You must be Mrs. Fletcher," she said warmly. "I'm Mildred Harmon. My husband told me to expect you today." "Yes, thank you for," Tabitha began, but was interrupted by a commotion at the back of the store. "I'm telling you, Harmon, Thornton won't stand for this." A familiar voice made Tabitha freeze. It was Greeley, the debt collector. Blackburn had no right to interfere in a legitimate business transaction. "That's between you gentlemen," came a measured response. "I'm just a storekeeper." "You tell Blackburn when you see him that Thornton wants a meeting, and he's not happy." Tabitha shrank behind a display of fabric as Greeley stomped toward the exit, his face flushed with anger. He didn't notice her, but the encounter left her shaken. Her problems weren't over, they had just changed form. "Don't you worry about that snake," Mildred said, noticing Tabitha's distress. "Now, let's see that list and get you properly outfitted." 2 hours later, Tabitha left the store with packages containing 2 new dresses, undergarments, a nightgown, a shawl, toiletries, and even a book of poetry. She tried to be frugal, but Mildred had insisted on quality items, assuring her that Mr. Blackburn was very specific about making sure you had everything you needed. As she turned the corner toward the boarding house, a rough hand grabbed her arm, pulling her into the narrow gap between buildings. Tabitha's packages tumbled to the ground as she found herself face to face with Amos Greeley. "Well, look who's playing the fine lady now," he sneered, his breath hot on her face. "You think you're free? Thornton doesn't like losing what's his." "Let me go," Tabitha demanded, struggling against his grip. "Mr. Blackburn paid your price twice over." Greeley laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Blackburn's money doesn't change the fact that your husband signed you over. Thornton wants you at his establishment, and what Thornton wants, he gets. I believe the lady asked you to let her go." The new voice was familiar, and relief flooded through Tabitha as Fletcher Blackburn stepped into view, his hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. Greeley released her immediately, stepping back. "This doesn't concern you anymore, Blackburn. You made your point, but Thornton accepted $8,000 for a debt that was half that amount," Fletcher interrupted coolly. "In my book, that concludes our business. You know that's not how it works." Greeley's confidence seemed to return as he noted they were alone in the alley. "Thornton's been looking for a reason to put you in your place for years. Now he's got one." Fletcher's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Tell Thornton if he has business with me, he knows where to find me, but Mrs. Fletcher is off limits." He stepped closer to Greeley, his voice dropping. And if I ever see you manhandling her again, our next conversation won't be nearly so pleasant." The threat hung in the air between them. After a tense moment, Greeley backed away. "This isn't over," he warned before disappearing around the corner. Fletcher immediately knelt to gather Tabitha's scattered packages. "Are you hurt?" "No, just startled," Tabitha said, her hands trembling slightly as she helped collect her things. "Thank you. Again. I suspected Thornton might not give up so easily." Fletcher's jaw tightened as he handed her the packages. "I'm sorry you were frightened. What did he mean about Thornton looking for a reason to put you in your place?" Tabitha asked, suddenly concerned that her troubles had become Fletcher's. Fletcher hesitated before answering. "Thornton and I have history. Nothing for you to worry about." "It seems like I should worry when you've made an enemy on my behalf," Tabitha insisted. "Mr. Blackburn, I appreciate everything you've done, but I can't have your blood on my conscience." "Fletcher," he corrected gently. "If we're going to keep meeting like this, you might as well use my given name." Despite everything, Tabitha felt herself smiling. "Fletcher, then." "And I'm Tabitha." Something changed in his expression as he heard her name, a softening around his eyes. "Tabitha," he repeated, as if testing how it felt. "It suits you." They walked together back to the boarding house, Fletcher insisting on carrying most of her packages. Along the way, he pointed out landmarks and businesses, helping her get her bearings in her new surroundings. "That's my office," he said, indicating a modest building with a sign reading Blackburn Land and Cattle. "I help ranchers acquire grazing rights and negotiate property boundaries." "You're a lawyer?" Tabitha asked, surprised. "Not exactly. More of a broker and mediator." Fletcher smiled slightly. "I know the territory better than most, and I have a knack for resolving disputes without bloodshed usually." They reached the boarding house, and Mrs. Abernathy watched with obvious interest from the window as Fletcher helped Tabitha up the steps. "Will you come in?" Tabitha asked, suddenly reluctant to end their conversation. Fletcher shook his head. "I have appointments this afternoon. But I'd like to check on you tomorrow if that's acceptable." "I'd like that," she admitted, taking her packages from him. As he turned to leave, Tabitha called after him. "Fletcher, why were you there yesterday when Greeley brought me into town? It seems like more than coincidence." Fletcher paused, considering his answer. "I make it my business to know when Thornton's men are up to something. When I heard they were bringing in a woman to settle a debt," he shrugged, "I couldn't stand by and let that happen." "So you'd have done the same for any woman?" Tabitha pressed, unsure why his answer seemed important. His eyes met hers directly. "I'd like to think so, but I can't say for certain." With a tip of his hat, he was gone, leaving Tabitha with more questions than answers about the man who had changed her fate. Inside, Mrs. Abernathy was waiting, poorly disguising her curiosity. "I see Mr. Blackburn found you in town." "He rescued me, actually," Tabitha admitted, deciding honesty was best. "One of Thornton's men cornered me. It seems my situation is more complicated than I realized." Mrs. Abernathy's expression grew serious. "Victor Thornton is not a man who accepts defeat gracefully. If he believes he has a claim on you, he won't simply walk away because Fletcher Blackburn interfered." "Why is there bad blood between them?" Tabitha asked, hoping for insights Mrs. Abernathy might possess. The older woman sighed, motioning for Tabitha to join her in the parlor. Once they were seated, she spoke in a lowered voice. "It's not my story to tell, but since you're caught in the middle, you should know something." Fletcher's younger sister was employed at Thornton's establishment several years ago. Mrs. Abernathy hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "She didn't survive the experience. Fletcher has never forgiven Thornton, though he couldn't prove any direct wrongdoing." Tabitha's heart sank. And now I've dragged him back into conflict with the man who hurt his family. No, dear. Mrs. Abernathy patted her hand. That conflict has been simmering for years, but you should understand why this might be personal for him beyond simple charity. That night, Tabitha lay awake in her narrow bed, turning over everything she'd learned. Fletcher Blackburn wasn't just a good Samaritan, he was a man with a vendetta against the very person who had claimed ownership of her. Had she merely been a convenient way to strike at his enemy? The thought shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. But then she remembered the gentleness in his eyes when he'd spoken her name, the way he'd stepped between her and danger without hesitation. Whatever his motivations, Fletcher Blackburn had given her a precious gift: freedom. And despite the complications, despite the danger, Tabitha felt something she hadn't expected to feel again after Elijah's betrayal. Hope. Tomorrow, she decided, she would begin repaying Fletcher's kindness the only way she could, by becoming self-sufficient as quickly as possible. She would find work, establish herself in Santa Fe, and ensure his sacrifice wasn't wasted. And perhaps, along the way, she might discover more about the enigmatic man who had paid twice to set her free. The next week passed in a blur of activity as Tabitha settled into life in Santa Fe. True to Mrs. Abernathy's word, the hotel had hired her as a laundress 3 days a week. The work was hard, hauling water, stoking fires, scrubbing linens until her hands were raw, but Tabitha tackled it with determination. Each coin she earned was a step toward independence. On her days away from the hotel, she helped Dr. Wilson organize his chaotic office, filing patient records and arranging his medical supplies. The elderly doctor was kind, if absent-minded, and seemed grateful for her meticulous attention to detail. "You have a good head on your shoulders, Mrs. Fletcher," he told her on her 3rd day. "Ever considered becoming a nurse's assistant? I could teach you some basics." "I'd like that very much," Tabitha replied, surprising herself with her enthusiasm. She'd never considered a profession beyond being a farmer's wife, but the idea of learning a valuable skill appealed to her. Throughout the week, Fletcher visited regularly, always arriving at Mrs. Abernathy's during appropriate calling hours. Their conversations gradually became less awkward as they discovered shared interests: poetry, astronomy, and a mutual love of horses. He never mentioned Thornton, and Tabitha didn't press for details about his sister, respecting his privacy. During one such visit, they sat in the parlor while rain pattered against the windows, a rare occurrence in the usually arid region. "You're looking well," Fletcher observed. "The territory agrees with you." Tabitha smiled, conscious of how much had changed in a short time. She'd filled out slightly with regular meals. Her skin had regained its healthy glow, and her new dresses, simple but well-made, were a vast improvement over the tattered garments she'd arrived in. "I've been fortunate," she acknowledged. "Thanks in large part to you." "You've done the hard work yourself," he countered. "I only provided an opportunity." "An opportunity that cost you $8,000, Tabitha reminded him, "which I'm determined to repay eventually." Fletcher frowned. "I've told you that's unnecessary." "It's necessary to me," she insisted. "I can't build a new life on such a debt." "Is that what you're doing, building a new life here in Santa Fe?" The question caught her off guard. "I suppose I am, unless—" She hesitated. "Is there a reason I shouldn't?" Fletcher leaned forward, his expression serious. "I've been meaning to discuss something with you. Thornton hasn't given up. His men have been asking questions about you around town." Tabitha's stomach knotted. "Has he threatened you?" "That's not important." Fletcher dismissed her concern with a wave. "What matters is your safety. I have a property outside town, a small ranch about 10 miles north. It's not much, but it's secure and far from Thornton's influence. I think you should consider staying there until things cool down." "At your home?" Tabitha raised an eyebrow. "That would hardly be proper, and it would certainly damage my reputation beyond repair." "Not with me," Fletcher clarified quickly. "My foreman and his wife live on the property. Martha is a good woman, she'd welcome the company. I rarely stay there myself these days, with business keeping me in town." Tabitha considered the offer. Living on Fletcher's ranch would mean giving up the independence she'd been working toward. Yet remaining in town clearly put both her and Fletcher at risk from Thornton's vengeance. "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully, "but running away feels like admitting defeat. I can't spend my life hiding." "It wouldn't be forever," Fletcher assured her. "Just until I can resolve this situation with Thornton." "And how do you plan to do that?" Tabitha asked, suddenly apprehensive about what he might be planning. Fletcher's expression became guarded. "I'm exploring legal options. Thornton's business practices wouldn't withstand proper scrutiny." "With the right evidence, you're going after him," Tabitha realized. "Because of what happened to your sister." Fletcher stiffened. "Who told you about that?" Mrs. Abernathy mentioned it only the barest details, Tabitha admitted. "Fletcher, I don't want to be the reason you resurrect a dangerous feud." "This isn't just about my sister anymore," he said quietly. "It's about stopping a man who believes he can own people, who thinks money gives him the right to destroy lives." Their eyes met, and the intensity in his gaze made Tabitha's breath catch. This wasn't just righteous anger, it was personal and deeper than she'd realized. "Let me think about the ranch," she conceded. "But please, don't do anything rash on my account." Before Fletcher could respond, the parlor door opened, and Mrs. Abernathy appeared with a telegram in hand. "Mr. Blackburn, a boy just delivered this for you. Said it was urgent." Fletcher read the message quickly, his expression darkening. "I have to go." He stood abruptly, tucking the telegram into his pocket. "Consider what I said, Tabitha, please." After he left, Tabitha couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened, that the telegram had somehow changed the course of events. Her instincts warned her that trouble was brewing, and Fletcher Blackburn was walking straight toward it. That evening, as Tabitha helped Mrs. Abernathy prepare dinner, she mentioned Fletcher's offer casually, seeking the older woman's opinion. "The Blackburn Ranch is a fine property," Mrs. Abernathy acknowledged, kneading bread dough with practiced hands. "And Martha Jenkins is indeed a respectable woman. There would be no impropriety in you staying there." "But," Tabitha prompted, sensing hesitation. Mrs. Abernathy sighed. "But I wonder if distance alone will solve the problem. Victor Thornton has a long reach and a longer memory. What would you do if you were me?" Tabitha asked, genuinely valuing the woman's counsel. "I'd consider carefully what I was willing to risk," Mrs. Abernathy replied cryptically, "and who I was willing to risk it for." Later that night, as Tabitha prepared for bed, a soft knock at her door startled her. She opened it to find Mrs. Abernathy looking uncharacteristically worried. "There's been trouble downtown," the landlady whispered. "A shootout at the Silver Dollar. Fletcher Blackburn was involved." Tabitha's heart lurched. "Is he?" "He's alive," Mrs. Abernathy assured her quickly, "but he's been shot. They've taken him to Doc Wilson's office." Without thinking, Tabitha grabbed her shawl. "I need to go to him." "It's nearly midnight," Mrs. Abernathy protested. "It wouldn't be proper." Tabitha's voice rose slightly. "The man saved my life, paid a fortune for my freedom, and now he's been shot, possibly because of me. I don't care what's proper." Mrs. Abernathy studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I'll come with you. That will maintain at least a semblance of propriety." The streets of Santa Fe were eerily quiet as they hurried toward the doctor's office, the occasional lantern casting long shadows. Outside the Silver Dollar, A small crowd still lingered, discussing the evening's excitement in hushed tones. Thornton's men cornered him. Never drew first, everyone saw it. Got one of them clean through the shoulder before they shot him. Fragments of conversation reached Tabitha's ears, increasing her anxiety. At the doctor's office, a lamp still burned in the window. Mrs. Abernathy knocked firmly. "After a moment, doctor." Wilson opened the door, looking exhausted. Blood stained his apron, and Tabitha fought against the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. "Mrs. Abernathy, Mrs. Fletcher," he acknowledged, unsurprised by their arrival. "I wondered when you'd hear. How is he?" Tabitha asked, trying to see past the doctor into the office. "Stable," Dr. Wilson answered. "The bullet went clean through his side. Missed anything vital, but he's lost blood and will be weak for some time." "May I see him?" Tabitha requested. The doctor hesitated, glancing at Mrs. Abernathy, who gave a slight nod. "Briefly," he conceded, stepping aside to let them enter. Fletcher lay on an examination table, his torso wrapped in white bandages already showing a spot of red seeping through. His face was pale, his eyes closed. Tabitha approached quietly, her throat tight with emotion she couldn't name. As if sensing her presence, Fletcher's eyes opened, focusing on her with effort. "Tabitha," he murmured, attempting to sit up before wincing in pain. "Don't move," she admonished gently, moving to his side. "You've been shot." A weak smile touched his lips. "So they tell me, not my first time." "What happened?" Tabitha asked, though she feared she already knew. "Thornton's men," Fletcher confirmed, his voice strained. "They were waiting at the Silver Dollar. Said their boss wanted a conversation about his property." His eyes met hers meaningfully. "I told them you weren't property, and things escalated. Guilt crashed over Tabitha. This is my fault." "No," Fletcher said firmly, reaching for her hand despite his obvious pain. "This was coming long before you arrived in Santa Fe. Thornton and I have unfinished business." "Your sister," Tabitha said softly. Fletcher's expression tightened. "Caroline. She was 19 when Thornton lured her to work at his place. Promised her good money, respectability as a hostess. By the time I discovered what was really happening," his voice faltered. "She took her own life rather than continue. I found her." Tabitha's heart broke for him. "I'm so sorry." "I tried to bring charges to get justice," Fletcher continued, his words becoming slower as fatigue claimed him. "But Thornton had the law in his pocket. Now he operates with impunity, treating people as commodities." He squeezed her hand weakly. "When I heard about you, I couldn't let history repeat itself." Dr. Wilson appeared at Tabitha's side. "He needs rest now. You can return in the morning." As Tabitha reluctantly released Fletcher's hand, he spoke once more, his voice barely audible. "Promise me you'll consider the ranch. Martha will expect you tomorrow." "I'll think about it," Tabitha assured him, though in truth her decision was already made. She couldn't allow Fletcher to continue putting himself in danger for her sake. Outside the doctor's office, Mrs. Abernathy gave her a knowing look. "You're going to the ranch, aren't you?" "Yes," Tabitha admitted, "but not to hide. I need to understand exactly what I'm caught in the middle of and how to end it." The next morning dawned clear and bright, at odds with the turmoil Tabitha felt as she packed her few belongings. Mrs. Abernathy had arranged for a wagon to take her to the Blackburn ranch, driven by a trusted friend of Fletcher's named Thomas Walsh. "I've included some preserves and bread," Mrs. Abernathy said, handing Tabitha a basket. "Martha Jenkins sets a good table, but it never hurts to arrive with a gift." "Thank you for everything," Tabitha said sincerely. "I'll repay your kindness someday. Just be careful," the older woman warned. "You're stepping into a feud that's been brewing for years. Emotions run high when vengeance is involved." The wagon arrived promptly at 9, driven by a weather-beaten man in his 50s with a friendly smile and sharp eyes. "Mrs. Fletcher, I'm Tom Walsh. Fletcher asked me to escort you to the ranch. How is he this morning?" Tabitha asked anxiously as she climbed onto the wagon seat. "Ornery as a cornered badger," Tom replied with obvious affection. "Doc says he can move to his townhouse tomorrow if the fever doesn't return. He wanted to come with us today, if you can believe it. Took both me and the doctor to talk sense into him." As they left Santa Fe behind, the landscape opened up into vast expanses of rugged beauty mesas in the distance, scrubby grassland dotted with juniper and piñon pine. The September air was crisp but pleasant, the sky an impossible blue that seemed to stretch forever. "How long have you known Fletcher?" Tabitha asked, breaking the companionable silence that had fallen between them. "Going on 15 years now," Tom replied, guiding the horses around a rocky patch in the trail. "Met him when he first came to the territory as a young man with his sister. Full of big dreams, those two. He told me about Caroline," Tabitha said quietly. "About what happened to her." Tom's face darkened. "Terrible business. Nearly destroyed Fletcher. He was wild with grief afterward, hunting for Thornton. Probably would have gotten himself killed if Judge Parker hadn't intervened." Judge Parker, federal judge who took a liking to Fletcher, convinced him that guns weren't the answer, that he could do more good working within the law. Got him started in the land business, taught him how to navigate territorial politics. Tom shook his head. "Fletcher's helped a lot of folks since then, especially women in difficult situations. But I've never seen him risk so much as he has for you." Tabitha pondered this revelation as they continued their journey. By midday, they crested a small rise, and Tom pointed ahead. "There it is, Blackburn Ranch." The property spread out before them, a modest but well-maintained main house with several outbuildings, corrals containing horses, and grazing cattle visible on the distant hillsides. It wasn't grand, but there was something inviting about it, something that spoke of care and attention. A plump, energetic woman with graying red hair emerged from the house as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "You must be Mrs. Fletcher," she called out warmly. "I'm Martha Jenkins. Welcome to the ranch." Tabitha was immediately enveloped in a motherly hug that somehow eased the tension she'd been carrying. "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Jenkins." "Martha, please," the woman insisted, leading her toward the house. "And it's our pleasure. Any friend of Fletcher's is welcome here." The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable, simple furniture arranged around a stone fireplace, curtains framing windows that offered stunning views of the surrounding landscape, shelves lined with books. It felt lived in and warm in a way Tabitha hadn't experienced since losing her home. "This is lovely," she said honestly. "Fletcher has good taste," Martha agreed, showing her to a bedroom at the back of the house. "This will be your room. It gets the morning sun. Hope you don't mind early rising." "Not at all. I'm used to farm hours." "Good." "Bill, that's my husband, has breakfast ready at 5. We run about 30 head of cattle and have 8 horses that need tending. Plus the garden and chickens keep me busy." Martha's eyes twinkled. "I won't expect you to work, of course, being Fletcher's guest. But if you're inclined to help, I wouldn't say no to an extra pair of hands." "I'd like to earn my keep," Tabitha assured her. After settling in, Tabitha joined Martha in the kitchen, where she was preparing dinner. As they worked together peeling potatoes, Tabitha gathered her courage to ask the questions that had been troubling her. "Martha, what exactly is Fletcher planning to do about Thornton?" The older woman's hand stilled momentarily. "So he's told you about that business?" "Some of it," Tabitha acknowledged. "I know about his sister and that he blames Thornton. But now I'm involved somehow and men are getting shot. I need to understand what's happening." Martha sighed deeply. Fletcher's been gathering evidence against Thornton for years, testimonies from women who worked at his establishment, records of crooked card games, proof of bribes to officials. He's been building a case to present to the federal authorities. Why hasn't he done so already? Fear, Martha said simply. Not Fletcher's fear, he's never lacked courage, but the women who would need to testify are terrified of Thornton. Without their statements in court, the evidence is circumstantial at best. And now, Tabitha prompted. Now he has you, a respectable widow whose husband legally signed her over like property. It's the kind of case that might finally bring scrutiny to Thornton's operation. Martha's expression became troubled. The shooting yesterday complicates things. Thornton will be more cautious now, more dangerous. The implications settled over Tabitha like a heavy blanket. Fletcher hadn't just rescued her out of kindness or attraction, she was potentially the key to his long-sought vengeance against Thornton. You think that's why he saved me? She asked, voicing her deepest fear. To use me against Thornton, Martha's response was immediate and firm. No, whatever his feelings about Thornton, Fletcher would never use another person as a pawn. He saved you because it was the right thing to do. The fact that your situation might help bring Thornton to justice is secondary. How can you be so sure? Because I've known that boy since he was 22 years old, broken by his sister's death and burning with rage, Martha said softly. I've watched him learn to channel that rage into purpose, to help others instead of seeking only revenge. The Fletcher who paid to free you isn't the same angry young man who wanted to shoot Thornton in the street all those years ago. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Bill Jenkins, a barrel-chested man with a weathered face and kind eyes. After introductions, they sat down to a hearty dinner, during which Bill shared news from his trip into a neighboring ranch. Heard something interesting while I was over at the Davidson place, he mentioned casually. Seems Thornton's bringing in hired guns from Dodge City. 3 of them arrived on yesterday's stage. Martha's fork clattered against her plate. Hired guns, whatever for? Bill's eyes shifted to Tabitha. Word is he's not taking kindly to Fletcher's interference. Says he has a contractual claim that needs to be enforced. Me, Tabitha said, her appetite vanishing. He's bringing in gunmen because of me. Don't you worry, Bill assured her quickly. This ranch is well protected. No one comes onto Blackburn land without us knowing. Despite his reassurance, Tabitha barely slept that night. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her. Fletcher wounded, hired killers arriving in Santa Fe, all because she'd been traded like cattle to settle a debt. By morning, she'd made a decision. She wouldn't be the cause of more bloodshed. There had to be another way to resolve this situation. After breakfast, she asked Bill if she could send a message to Fletcher in town. Planning to ride in this afternoon, he told her. I can deliver it personally. Tabitha wrote carefully, choosing her words with precision. Fletcher, I've been thinking about everything that's happened since you saved me from Thornton's men. While I'm grateful beyond words for your intervention, I cannot allow you to risk your life further on my behalf. I've learned about the gunmen Thornton has brought to Santa Fe, and I fear what might happen if this conflict continues. There must be a legal solution that doesn't require violence. If my testimony against Thornton would help bring him to justice, I am willing to provide it. But I need to understand exactly what that would entail. Please focus on your recovery. When you are well enough, I would like to discuss a plan that doesn't involve anyone else getting shot. With sincere gratitude, Tabitha, she sealed the letter and handed it to Bill, who promised to deliver it directly to Fletcher. With that task completed, Tabitha threw herself into ranch work, helping Martha with laundry and bread making, then assisting Bill with feeding the horses. Physical labor had always been her refuge from troubling thoughts, and today was no exception. That afternoon, while gathering eggs from the chicken coop, Tabitha heard hoofbeats approaching. Thinking Bill had returned early, she stepped outside, only to freeze at the sight of 3 unfamiliar riders approaching the house. Their appearance, dark clothing, well-worn gun belts, hard expressions instantly put her on alert. Martha emerged from the house, wiping flour from her hands. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" she called, her tone friendly but cautious. "Looking for a Mrs. Fletcher," the lead rider announced. "Heard she might be staying here." "There's no one by that name here," Martha replied smoothly. "This is the Blackburn Ranch, private property." The man's eyes narrowed as he scanned the yard, eventually landing on Tabitha. A slow smile spread across his face. "That right. Then who might this lovely lady be?" Tabitha straightened her shoulders. "I'm Mrs. Jenkins' niece visiting from Colorado," she lied, impressed by her own steady voice. "Funny," the man drawled. "You match the description we were given perfectly. Brown hair, green eyes, pretty as a picture. Mr. Thornton sends his regards, Mrs. Fletcher. He'd like a word with you in town." "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," Martha interjected, moving to stand beside Tabitha. "Now, unless you have business with Mr. Blackburn, I'll have to ask you to leave our property." The leader dismounted slowly, his hand resting near his pistol in an unspoken threat. "We're not leaving without Mrs. Fletcher. Thornton paid good money for her, and contracts need to be honored in these parts." "That contract was fulfilled twice over," came a new voice, startling everyone. Fletcher Blackburn sat astride his horse at the edge of the yard, his face pale but determined. Beside him, Bill Jenkins held a rifle trained steadily on the intruders. "You're supposed to be laid up with a bullet hole," the gunman said, clearly surprised by Fletcher's appearance. "I heal quickly," Fletcher replied, though Tabitha could see the strain in his posture. "Now, you're trespassing on my land and threatening my guests. I suggest you leave while that's still an option." The standoff stretched for several tense seconds before the gunman laughed harshly. "This isn't over, Blackburn. Thornton doesn't like being cheated." "Neither do I," Fletcher responded evenly. "Tell Thornton if he has legal grievances, the courts are open to him. Otherwise, stay away from my people." The men retreated, throwing dark glances over their shoulders as they rode away. Only when they were out of sight did Fletcher sway slightly in his saddle, revealing the toll the confrontation had taken on his injured body. Bill rushed to help him dismount, supporting him toward the house. "Damn fool," he muttered affectionately. "Doctor said bed rest for at least 3 days." "Had a feeling they might come here," Fletcher explained weakly as Martha and Tabitha followed them inside. "Couldn't let them find her alone." Once Fletcher was settled on the sofa with Martha fussing over his bandages, Tabitha confronted him directly. "How did you know they were coming here?" "Your letter," he admitted. "Bill delivered it this morning. When you mentioned the gunman, I realized Thornton would make his move quickly. Then one of my sources in town reported 3 men asking questions about the Blackburn Ranch." "So you rode out here, reopening your wound in the process," Tabitha said, exasperation mixing with concern. "That was reckless. Calculated risk," Fletcher countered. "I know Thornton's tactics: intimidation first, then force if that fails. I couldn't let them frighten you." Tabitha sat beside him, her anger softening at the sight of his evident pain. "What happens now? They'll be back, won't they?" Fletcher nodded grimly. "Thornton won't give up easily, but we have an advantage he doesn't know about yet." He reached into his jacket and withdrew an official-looking document. "This arrived from Judge Parker yesterday. Federal authorization to investigate Thornton's operation." "What does that mean exactly?" Tabitha asked. "It means with your testimony and the evidence I've gathered, We can bring formal charges against Thornton not just locally, where he has influence, but at the federal level. Fletcher's eyes brightened with determination. We don't have to run or fight. We can end his operation legally, permanently. And what would I need to do? Tabitha asked. Testify about the debt, how your husband signed you over, how Thornton's men treated you. Fletcher's voice softened. It won't be easy. You'll face scrutiny, possibly public scorn. But your story could help other women avoid similar fates. Tabitha considered the implications. Publicly revealing the humiliating circumstances of her arrival in Santa Fe would certainly damage whatever reputation she might build. Yet the alternative, allowing Thornton to continue treating women as property, was unthinkable. I'll do it, she decided. But you need to recover first. No more heroic rides with a bullet wound. Fletcher smiled, the tension in his face easing slightly. Agreed. Though I have to say, this isn't how I imagined introducing you to my home. Your home. Tabitha glanced around, realizing the significance of the comfortable house with its well-stocked bookshelves. You actually live here. When I can, Fletcher confirmed. The townhouse is for business, but this is where I belong. His eyes met hers with unexpected vulnerability. Or at least, where I'd like to belong if circumstances were different. Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings neither was ready to name. Tabitha looked away first, suddenly aware of Martha and Bill's watchful presence. You need rest, she said firmly, rising from the sofa. We can discuss the details tomorrow. That night, after Fletcher had been settled in the main bedroom and the Jenkins had retired to their quarters in the adjacent building, Tabitha sat alone on the porch, watching stars emerge in the vast New Mexico sky. The day's events swirled in her mind: the confrontation, Fletcher's arrival, his mention of federal charges against Thornton. And beneath it all, the growing realization that her feelings for Fletcher Blackburn had evolved far beyond gratitude. The fear she'd felt seeing him sway in his saddle, weakened from his wound, had been more than concern for a benefactor. She was falling in love with him, despite all the complications and dangers surrounding them. But was it real? Or merely the natural response of a vulnerable woman toward her rescuer? And even if her feelings were genuine, what of his? Was his protection born of attraction, or simply an extension of his vendetta against Thornton? Did he see her as Tabitha Fletcher, woman of worth, or merely as a useful witness against his sister's destroyer? The creak of the door interrupted her thoughts. Fletcher stood there, leaning heavily on a walking stick, his face ghostly in the moonlight. You should be resting, Tabitha chided gently. I've rested enough, he replied, carefully lowering himself onto the bench beside her. Couldn't sleep knowing you were out here alone with your thoughts. How did you know I was troubled? Fletcher's smile was barely visible in the darkness. Your eyes, they darken when you're worried, like storm clouds gathering. The observation, so personal, so attentive, made Tabitha's heart skip. You notice such things? I notice everything about you, he admitted quietly, more than I probably should. Silence fell between them, comfortable yet charged with unspoken possibilities. Tabitha gathered her courage to ask the question that had been haunting her. Fletcher, why did you really save me that day? Was it because of Caroline? Because you saw a chance to finally bring Thornton down? Fletcher turned toward her, his expression serious in the silvery moonlight. When I first heard Thornton's men were bringing in a woman to settle a debt, I was motivated by memory of Caroline, by the need to prevent another tragedy. But the moment I saw you in that wagon— He paused, seeming to search for the right words. Everything changed. It wasn't about Thornton anymore, it was about you. You couldn't have known me then, Tabitha pointed out. I was just another woman in trouble. "That's not true," Fletcher countered softly. "Even chained and frightened, there was a dignity about you, a strength that impressed me immediately. And since then, watching you rebuild your life with such determination, such grace despite everything you've endured." He shook his head in apparent wonder. "Tabitha, my feelings for you have nothing to do with Thornton or vengeance or the past. They're about who you are and who I am when I'm with you." His confession hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Tabitha felt tears prick her eyes, moved by his sincerity. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Of Thornton?" Fletcher asked, misunderstanding. "Of feeling too much," Tabitha clarified. "My husband betrayed me in the worst possible way. He gambled away my freedom, my very self. I trusted him, and he treated me as property to be traded." "I'm not Elijah," Fletcher said gently, "and I would never ask you to trust blindly. Trust should be earned, not assumed." "What if this isn't real?" Tabitha voiced her deepest fear. "What if these feelings are just because you rescued me? What if they fade when the danger passes?" Fletcher considered her words thoughtfully. "That's a fair question, and I don't have a perfect answer." He reached for her hand tentatively, giving her every opportunity to pull away. "But I believe true feelings reveal themselves in time, through actions more than words. When this business with Thornton is concluded, we'll have that time if you want it." Tabitha didn't withdraw her hand from his. Instead, she laced her fingers with his, taking comfort in the simple connection. "I think I would like that very much." The moment was interrupted by the distant sound of approaching horses, many horses, moving quickly toward the ranch. Fletcher stiffened, immediately alert. "Get inside," he ordered, struggling to his feet. "Wake Bill and tell him to bring the rifles." "What is it?" Tabitha asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Thornton," Fletcher confirmed grimly. "He's decided not to wait for the law to catch up with him." The peaceful night erupted into chaos as Tabitha rushed to alert the Jenkins. By the time she returned to the main house, Fletcher had positioned himself by a window, rifle in hand despite his injury. "At least 8 riders," he reported tensely. "They've split up to surround the house." "You can't fight them all," Tabitha said, fear clenching her heart. "Not in your condition." "We don't need to fight them all," Fletcher replied. "Just hold them off until help arrives." "Help?" Fletcher managed a tight smile. "I may have sent word to some friends in the territorial marshal's office before I left town. They should be right behind Thornton's men." A voice called from outside the house. "Blackburn, send out the woman and we'll leave peacefully. Thornton just wants what's his." "She doesn't belong to Thornton or anyone else," Fletcher shouted back. "This is federal territory and slavery was abolished years ago." The response was a gunshot that shattered a window, sending glass spraying across the floor. Martha and Bill burst into the house, Bill carrying 2 additional rifles. "Like old times," he commented grimly, taking up position at another window. "Get to the root cellar," Fletcher instructed Tabitha and Martha. "It's safest there." "I'm not hiding while you risk your life for me," Tabitha declared firmly. "I can shoot." Fletcher assessed her determined expression and nodded. "Take the back window." "Aim high, we want to discourage them, not start a bloodbath." The next minutes were a blur of noise and tension as Thornton's men fired at the house, and the defenders returned fire strategically, targeting areas near the attackers rather than the men themselves. The tactic worked initially, keeping the gunmen at a distance. But gradually, the attackers grew bolder, edging closer to the house from multiple directions. A bullet splintered the doorframe inches from Fletcher's head, and Tabitha saw fresh blood seeping through his shirt where his wound had reopened from the exertion. "They're going to rush us soon," Bill observed tensely. "We can't hold them all off." As if in answer to his words, A new volley of gunfire erupted but not directed at the house. Shouts of confusion rose from Thornton's men, followed by a commanding voice ordering them to drop their weapons. "Marshal service," the voice announced. "You're surrounded." Through the window, Tabitha could see lanterns approaching at least a dozen men on horseback, their badges glinting in the moonlight. Thornton's gunmen, realizing they were outflanked, began to surrender, dropping their weapons and raising their hands. The siege was over almost as quickly as it had begun. As federal marshals took Thornton's men into custody, Tabitha turned to Fletcher, who had slumped against the wall, his face alarmingly pale. "Fletcher," she rushed to his side, pressing her hand against his bleeding wound. "Martha, he needs help." "I'm fine," Fletcher insisted weakly. "Just open the stitches a bit." "You're not fine," Tabitha countered, tears threatening. "You could have died protecting me." "Worth it," he murmured, his eyes holding hers with unexpected tenderness despite his pain. A tall man in a marshal's uniform entered the house, surveying the scene with a practiced eye. "Fletcher Blackburn. Should have known I'd find you in the middle of a gunfight instead of resting like the doctor ordered." "Had pressing matters, Marshal Davis," Fletcher replied, attempting a smile. "Timing's impeccable as always." "Got your message about Thornton," the marshal confirmed. "Then heard in town he'd gathered men for a raid out here. Figured you could use some official assistance." His gaze shifted to Tabitha. "This must be Mrs. Fletcher, the lady at the center of the storm." "Tabitha," she corrected quietly, still supporting Fletcher. "Just Tabitha now." While the marshals secured the area and Martha tended to Fletcher's reopened wound, Marshal Davis explained that they had been building a case against Thornton for months. Fletcher's evidence and Tabitha's situation had provided the final justification needed for action. "We've arrested Thornton himself in town," he informed them. "Found enough contraband and fraudulent documents in his office to keep him locked away for years. His gambling operation is finished." The news should have brought Tabitha unmitigated relief, but her focus remained on Fletcher, who insisted he was fine despite evidence to the contrary. When the doctor finally arrived, summoned by one of the marshals, he was furious to find his patient had torn open his wound. "Bed rest meant rest in a bed," he scolded as he redressed the injury. "Not gunfights with notorious criminals." "Circumstances were extraordinary," Fletcher defended weakly. "They always are with you," the doctor grumbled, administering laudanum for the pain. "This time you stay down for at least a week, or I'll tie you to the bed myself." As the excitement subsided and dawn approached, the marshals departed with their prisoners, leaving 2 deputies behind for protection until the situation was fully resolved. Martha insisted Tabitha get some rest, but she refused to leave Fletcher's side, maintaining a vigil in a chair beside his bed. Watching him sleep, his features relaxed by the medicine, Tabitha allowed herself to fully acknowledge what her heart already knew: she loved this man. Not just for saving her, but for who he was. Honorable, determined, willing to risk everything for what he believed was right. The coming days would bring challenges: court appearances, public scrutiny, the process of rebuilding her life. But for the first time since Elijah's death, Tabitha felt truly hopeful about the future. A future that, perhaps, might include the man sleeping before her. Fletcher's eyelids fluttered open briefly, and he reached for her hand. "Still here," he murmured drowsily. "Still here," she confirmed, squeezing his fingers gently. "Rest now. We have time." A faint smile touched his lips before he drifted back to sleep, his hand still holding hers as the first light of a new day filtered through the curtains. The next week passed in a blur of activity as Thornton's operation was dismantled by federal authorities. The news spread quickly through Santa Fe and surrounding territories. Thornton arrested, his establishment closed, his assets seized. For women like those he had exploited, it represented long overdue justice. Tabitha split her time between helping Martha run the ranch and making trips into town to provide her testimony to Marshal Davis. Each statement she gave strengthened the case against Thornton, though the process forced her to relive the humiliation of being sold to cover her husband's debts. Throughout it all, Fletcher remained confined to bed on doctor's orders, chafing at his inactivity but gradually regaining strength. Tabitha visited him frequently, reading to him from his collection of books, or simply sitting in comfortable silence, as they both worked through the emotional aftermath of the confrontation. During one such quiet evening, as sunset painted the room in golden light, Fletcher broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "The marshal says they have enough evidence now," he told her. "Your testimony, combined with documentation from Thornton's office, guarantees he'll face serious federal charges. The case against him is solid without requiring you to appear at a public trial." Tabitha looked up from her sewing, surprised. "I thought I would have to testify in court." "You could," Fletcher clarified, "but Davis believes it unnecessary given the strength of the written evidence. He wanted me to tell you that you've done your part." Relief washed over Tabitha. While she would have testified if needed, the thought of publicly recounting her ordeal had filled her with dread. "That's good news," she said softly. "It means you're free to move forward," Fletcher continued, his tone carefully neutral. "No more looking over your shoulder, no more fear of Thornton's reach." "Free," Tabitha repeated, testing the word. For weeks, her life had been defined by others, by Elijah's betrayal, by Thornton's claim, by Fletcher's protection. Now, truly, she could choose her own path. Fletcher seemed to read her thoughts. "You could return to Mrs. Abernathy's if you preferred, or perhaps open a small business with your sewing skills. Dr. Wilson mentioned you were invaluable in organizing his office. There would be similar opportunities elsewhere." Tabitha studied him, noting the careful way he avoided suggesting she might stay at the ranch. "Are you trying to send me away, Fletcher Blackburn?" A flush crept up his neck. "Not at all. I don't want you to feel obligated to stay here because of everything that's happened. Your life is your own now. Your choices should be yours alone. And if my choice is to stay," Tabitha asked boldly, her heart pounding. "What then?" Fletcher's eyes met hers, a flicker of hope visible in their depths. "Then I would be the happiest man in the territory," he admitted quietly. "But I need to know it's what you truly want, not what you think you owe me." Tabitha set aside her sewing and moved to sit on the edge of his bed, close enough to see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "When I first arrived in Santa Fe, chained in that wagon, I never imagined finding anything good here. I thought my life was over, that whatever came next would be merely survival." She took his hand, tracing the calluses that spoke of hard work and perseverance. "Instead, I found you. A man who paid twice to set me free, who risked his life to protect me, who shows me every day what true honor looks like." "Tabitha," Fletcher began, but she gently placed her fingers against his lips. "Let me finish," she requested softly. "I've spent days examining my heart, questioning my feelings, wondering if what I feel is real or merely gratitude, and I've come to understand something important." She smiled, blinking back unexpected tears. "Gratitude doesn't make my heart race when you enter a room. Gratitude doesn't have me thinking about your smile when I should be concentrating on chores. And gratitude certainly doesn't have me imagining a future where I wake up beside you every morning." Fletcher's expression transformed, hope blossoming into joy. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I love you, Fletcher Blackburn," Tabitha declared simply. "Not because you saved me, but because of who you are, And if you'll have me, I'd like to stay not as your guest or as someone you protected, but as a woman who chooses you above all others." For a moment, Fletcher seemed speechless, overwhelmed by her declaration. Then he reached up to cradle her face with gentle hands. "I've loved you since the moment you stepped down from that wagon," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "Your courage, your dignity despite impossible circumstances. I was lost before I even knew your name." He drew her closer, his lips finding hers in a tender, questioning kiss that quickly deepened as Tabitha responded with all the feelings she'd held in check for weeks. When they finally parted, both breathless, Fletcher pressed his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Not because you need protection or because you have nowhere else to go. Stay because we belong together." "Yes," Tabitha answered simply, sealing her response with another kiss. 2 months later, on a crisp December morning with snow dusting the distant mountains, Tabitha Fletcher became Tabitha Blackburn in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Mrs. Abernathy, Dr. Wilson, Marshall Davis, and several neighbors gathered to witness their vows, spoken with quiet confidence under a canopy of winter stars. "I once paid everything I had to set you free," Fletcher reminded her as he slipped a gold band onto her finger. "But you gave me something far more valuable in return, a reason to look forward rather than backward, to build rather than avenge." Tabitha, radiant in a cream-colored dress she'd sewn herself, felt tears of happiness well up as she placed a matching ring on his hand. "You showed me that freedom isn't just about breaking chains," she replied. "It's about choosing your own bonds, the ones that strengthen rather than constrain." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, cheers erupted from their assembled friends. The celebration continued into the evening, with music and dancing in the ranch house, decorated with pine boughs and candles for the occasion. Later, as the last guests departed and quiet settled over their home, Fletcher led Tabitha to the porch where they had first acknowledged their feelings for each other. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small wooden box from his pocket. "A wedding gift." Inside lay a document, the deed to their ranch, now bearing both their names. "Equal partners," Fletcher explained, "in everything always." Tabitha traced their joined names on the paper, touched by the significance of the gesture. "From property to property owner," she mused. "Quite a journey." "One we're just beginning," Fletcher reminded her, drawing her into his arms. "There's a whole territory out there. Challenges to face, opportunities to seize, good to be done." "Together," Tabitha agreed, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. The stars above them seemed to shimmer with promise, the future stretching out before them like the vast New Mexico landscape, wild and beautiful, and theirs to shape as they chose. 1 year later, as a gentle spring evening settled over the Blackburn ranch, Tabitha sat on the porch rocker, cradling their infant son Thomas in her arms. The baby, just 3 months old, had Fletcher's eyes and her determination, already fighting sleep despite the late hour. Fletcher emerged from the house, a steaming mug of tea in each hand. "Still awake, the little troublemaker?" he asked affectionately, setting Tabitha's tea on the small table beside her. "Takes after his father," she teased. "Too stubborn to rest when there's life to be experienced." Fletcher laughed softly, settling into the chair beside hers. "Fair point, though his mother's no stranger to determination herself." They sat in companionable silence, watching the stars emerge above their land that had prospered under their joint care. The ranch had expanded, now employing several hands to manage the growing herd. Their reputation for fair dealings had spread throughout the territory, bringing new opportunities and connections. But more importantly, they had built a home filled with love and purpose. Fletcher's nightmares about his sister had gradually faded, replaced by dreams of the future. Tabitha's memories of Elijah's betrayal had lost their sting, overshadowed by the joy of her new life. "You ever think about how we met?" Fletcher asked suddenly, his expression contemplative in the fading light. "Often," Tabitha admitted. "Though not with regret anymore. Strange as it sounds, I'm almost grateful for the circumstances that brought me here." Fletcher reached for her hand, his thumb gently stroking her palm. "I received a letter today from Marshal Davis. Thornton will remain in prison for at least another decade. His appeal was denied." "Good," Tabitha said firmly. "Though I rarely think of him now, he has no power over our lives anymore." "No," Fletcher agreed. "We claimed that power for ourselves." As if sensing the significance of the moment, baby Thomas finally succumbed to sleep, his tiny features relaxed in perfect trust. Tabitha adjusted the blanket around him, marveling as she often did at the miracle of their child. "I was thinking," Fletcher said, his tone casual but his eyes intent, "that the East Pasture might make a good spot for a school someday. This territory needs education for its children, and we have the land to spare." Tabitha smiled, recognizing the seeds of a new mission in her husband's words. "A worthy project. Perhaps in a few years, when Thomas has siblings to attend with him." Fletcher's eyes lit up at the suggestion. "Siblings, plural. That sounds like a plan I can fully support, Mrs. Blackburn." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, making plans and sharing dreams. The woman who had once been sold to cover her dead husband's gambling debts, and the man who had paid twice to set her free, had forged something precious from circumstances that should have broken them, a love strong enough to overcome the past, resilient enough to weather any future storms, and generous enough to extend beyond themselves to the community they now called home. Together, Fletcher and Tabitha Blackburn had discovered that true freedom wasn't about escape or independence. It was about choosing the right bonds, the ones that elevated rather than diminished, that empowered rather than constrained. And in that freedom, they had found not just love, but purpose, creating a legacy that would endure long after their own story became part of the rich tapestry of tales from the wild New Mexico territory. As Thomas stirred in her arms, Tabitha pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead. "Your father once told me that all it takes to change a person's fate is one decision," she whispered to her son. "Remember that, little one. Choose wisely, choose kindly, and know that the greatest treasures in life are never bought or sold. They're given freely from the heart." Fletcher's hand found hers in the darkness, their fingers intertwining as naturally as their lives had become entangled on that fateful day in Santa Fe. No words were needed between them now. Their touch spoke volumes of gratitude for the past, contentment in the present, and boundless hope for all the years that stretched before them. Under the vast New Mexico sky, their story, once defined by debts and payments, had transformed into something far more valuable. A testament to the power of choice, the strength of dignity, and the enduring miracle of love freely given and gratefully received.